Hello and welcome to the Politics of Peterborough, the podcast where I chat with the people who have been elected to make decisions about our city and those who try to influence them. I'm your host, Dave Adcock. If you have any suggestions as to who you'd like to listen to on a future episode of the podcast, or have any questions you'd like to put to my guests, you can get in touch via Facebook or X at politicspboro, or send an email to politics.peterborough@hotmail.com. On with the show. My guest for this episode went to Lincoln Road Boys' School before going to Leicester College to study art, print and graphic design. He then set up his own company as an entertainment agent, promoter and DJ, which he's run for over 50 years. In 2016, he was elected to the council in Eye, Thorney and Newborough Ward and was re-elected in 2019 and 2023. From 2018 to 2021, he was cabinet advisor to leader John Holditch, and from 2021 to 2023, he was deputy leader of the council, while also holding various cabinet posts. Councillor Steve Allen, welcome to the Politics of Peterborough.
Hello, pleased to be with you.
So let's start with your Peterborough story. Were you born in the city?
Indeed, Thorpe Hall, Dogsthorpe, Gladstone Street. My parents were in Gladstone Street at their parents' house, and I was there as a baby for a very short period of time, moved to Dogsthorpe and spent a wonderful childhood in Dogsthorpe. It's a great estate, you know. I'm not sure whether it's quite so good now because things change over the years, but, you know, it was an ideal estate for troops returning from war. And my dad had done enough of gallivanting during the wartime, was pleased to be a dad to a boy, me, and just continue his job. My mum worked at a sweet shop, which was my uncle's sweet shop on the row of shops called Central Avenue. And so my childhood was idyllic, and indeed the teenage years were also very enjoyable.
Now, you, as I said in the intro, you went off to Leicester to go to college.
I didn't go off. Now, day release, I was a printer working at a printing company in Peterborough, and I did day and block release. First of all at Wisbech College, which was where the printing was taught. Then as you moved up to the intermediate state, I went off to Leicester College of Art.
And did you ever think about moving out there, or was Peterborough always where you were going to stay?
No, I liked Peterborough. My friends' connections and all the stuff were Peterborough. As a young mod, the Peterborough mods were well regarded, and I was proud to be one of a group of lads and ladies, girls, that were, you know, enjoying a reputation on the scene. So yeah, Peterborough's mine, and I'm happy to be proud of Peterborough.
Now, did you grow up in a particularly political household?
My dad didn't talk about politics. My mother's father was a shop steward at Baker Perkins, but, you know, I was never initiated into politics from my house. But my step-granddad, my dad's mother's second husband, was a Jewish gentleman called Lou Jacobs, who was passionate about politics, a Fabian and all the stuff, and he spoke to me a lot about politics.
So at what point did you decide that you were a Conservative, or did it find you?
Well, it's been a journey, a lifetime journey, to use a hackneyed phrase. When I was 14, 15, I was secretary of Peterborough Young Socialists, and also membership secretary of the Youth CND, Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. We're all to the left when we're young, I think. There's a hackneyed saying, and I don't know who it's attributed to. Some say Churchill, some say others. If you're not a socialist when you're young, you've got no heart. And if you're not a Conservative as you get older, you've got no brain. And I think I've misquoted that because it's been attributed to so many different people. But that's a view I had. So I was very much not a firebrand. I was a socialist as a kid, but always with a sort of less left-wing kind of view, middle-of-the-road socialist, with the youth kind of passion bolted on. So I did the not the Aldermaston March, but I certainly stood outside Alconbury with the Ban the Bomb banner, and I was involved in the local politics, knew all the old names of the Socialist Labour group at that time. Charlie Swift when he was much younger, Carl Hall, and all of those people. I knew them, and many of them took me under their wing because, you know, when you're 14 or 15, older people are proud to see you join their cause. Anyway, my view changed. As I went into industry, I was a young apprentice printer, and really, I didn't like the way that those people involved in the unions used their union position. I'll say no more than that because I don't want to personalise it. But what really turned me off being a socialist, because I was very much behind the Harold Wilson government. Time for a change and let's go with Labour and all that stuff. Went to several rallies. I enjoyed the speeches from people like Harold Wilson. But when Barbara Castle, who was the employment minister at the time, brought in a policy called In Place of Strife, which was to deal with the strikes that were happening at that time, many thought unnecessary strikes, politically motivated strikes. And when the unions wouldn't support her, I switched off from the Labour Party and indeed did that silly thing of ripping up my card. And then I spent a long time enjoying life, as I say earlier on, as a teenager, as a young mod. And then subsequently I got into business, running my entertainment agency and my DJ agency. And I suppose commercial thoughts took over from politics. But always in the back of my mind, because I'm politically conscious, if nothing else, and always have been.
So what was it that ended up moving you from being politically conscious into actually thinking about standing as a councillor? Okay,
well, there's a little bit of an interim. I was very much interested in the SDP when it was first formed, Social Democrat Party, because that was the wing of the Labour Party that I supported. Roy Jenkins, an incredible politician, David Owen, a very good politician, and others in that firmament. I thought that they'd done the right thing by moving away from overt socialism into a more kind of social democratic approach. I courted with that for a period of time, but never got over involved. And then I suppose, I've always been interested. The news is my favourite TV programme, and news analysis is my second favourite TV programme. And so I just went along with it and slowly became more and more conservative with my views as I got older, I guess. And I was very impressed with David Cameron when he became the leader of the Conservative Party. And I thought, that's my kind of politics.
So did you put yourself forward or were you approached?
I helped with Park Ward, where we live in Peterborough, where we're sitting now, actually. I helped with Park Ward elections for people like John Peach and for Stuart Jackson, who was our MP. I did canvassing for them and door knocking and all the stuff. And I suppose because you're around, the older politicians or the more experienced, the established politicians say to you, you really ought to stand. And that's what happened to me. I was asked to stand. I stood in Park Ward on 2 occasions, didn't win. And then it was suggested to me that I go and stand in Eye, Thorney and Newborough. Now, although I don't live in Eye, Thorney or Newborough, I know the area really well. As a kid, I used to do bike rides to Newborough and on Willow Drove down to the Welland. In Eye, I was hanging around with friends who were Eye friends. So, I know those villages quite well. And I felt that although it wasn't where I lived, it was somewhere I could be comfortable. And people would be comfortable with me being their candidate. And I got elected.
You stood in, that was 2016, which was the last time the whole council was elected at the same time. And there were 2 fellow Conservative candidates were already sitting councillors.
Yes.
As you said, you'd stood a couple of times before and been unsuccessful. Did you go into that 2016 election feeling fairly confident that you would be successful that time?
Well, one hopes one's successful when you put yourself forward, although, of course, some people are paper candidates and then surprised when they get elected. But no, I was hopeful, of course. I worked hard. I worked the ward very hard, visited as many people as I could, spoke to as many people as I could, visited the committees and such like that constitute the wards, politics. And so I was fairly confident and we worked it hard. And I think there was 3 councillors up. There's David Sanders, there was Richard Brown and myself, and I came second out of those 3.
Now, at this point, you've been a councillor for over 9 years now. Has it met
stager.
Yeah. Has it met the expectations you had prior to being elected?
Yes, I've enjoyed my period as a councillor. I'd hope to stand again. My term's got another 18 months to run, but I'd hope to stand again. Local government reorganisation will definitely put a cat amongst the pigeons about who stands where and who's likely to get elected, but I'm fairly confident and I'll continue to represent my ward and the 3 villages with real enthusiasm.
Now, as I mentioned in the intro, you were a cabinet advisor for 3 years and then were made deputy leader and became a full cabinet member. How big a change is that from just being a ward councillor?
Yeah, I think it's a great difference. I mean, I was very fortunate because I was offered a chair within 2 or 3 months of being elected. I was chair of the Communities Committee. It's changed its name several times, but that's basically the thrust of the committee. Enjoyed being a chair. And then when John Holditch, who was the leader at the time, appointed me as his cabinet advisor, that was very useful because John was and still is, I suppose, a well-practiced conservative politician, although I think he's no longer active. But it was great to have that kind of training I'm not a young person by any stretch. I didn't get elected as a young person, but I was inexperienced. And it was great to see how John operated and have the value of his experience on the council.
You were a member of the ruling party for 7 years and deputy leader of the council for the last 2 of those. Would you say the council was well run during that period of time?
Yes, I'm not going to berate anyone. 2020 hindsight. Did the ruling Conservative group during the time it was in power make any mistakes? I'm sure it did. I'm sure some things you did 2 or 3 years ago you'd perhaps want to review. And so therefore, that's how politics are. You deal with it, what's before you. We are where we are is a famous saying in politics. You try to make the best decisions using all the information before you, and you make that decision. And yes, some were wrong, some will be right, but that's the case of how our lives run, isn't it, really?
What would you say were the particular successes during that period of time?
You know, I'm going to say Fletton Keynes was a great success. It really was, because people now, using this 2020 hindsight, or not using sufficient 2020 hindsight in many cases, they forget that the South Bank, all my working life and my teenage life and my life as a kid, the South Bank needed to be developed. Must develop the South Bank. And it floundered on many occasions, different attempts to do something about it. There was an old B&Q there was what's left of the railway there. It was effectively an inner city blight. And by doing Fletton Keynes, we've now seen that area developed. And it's largely been successful. The failures, not to get Arts Council grant to turn the old mill into an arts centre, that was a failure. But outside the control of Peterborough City Council or the leadership, I think that the development of the goods shed, which we nearly pulled off with a fantastic promoter. In fact, there's a brochure sitting next to where you are with the vision for doing that goods shed as a kind of coal drop yard kind of experience. That the promoter, wrong word, developer, the businessman pulled out at the very last moment. That was a great shame. That's a major regret in my time as a cabinet member with that responsibility. And of course, we've got the hotel, which people are rightly very, very concerned about. It was a catalyst to getting that development going, along with the offices for the government passport office. But circumstances with COVID, again, people got short memories. We forget how traumatic COVID was to the world, let alone Peterborough, let alone this country. And so COVID was unpredictable, unforeseen. And then subsequent to that, you have the problems with the war in Europe, with Ukraine, the enormous cost increases of raw materials, and even now, the cost increases of the Labour government charging people more money to employ people. So these costs kept escalating, and I hope we can pull off the sale, which the current Labour administration want to achieve. I did think that the idea of developing it ourselves, which was the finance officer who's recently left us, concept, I thought that was fair and reasonable, and we should have proceeded with that at pace. But we didn't, and now we have a hotel that we need to dispose of. And you know, there's nothing wrong with selling anything. Get the right price. That's the secret.
Now, cabinet roles come with real responsibility. What was the toughest decision you had to make, and how did you reach it?
Well, that would be an easy one to tell you. The closure of the hydrotherapy pool and the temporary closure of the Key Theatre. 2 decisions that I was lumbered with without having too much input because of the financial situation the council was in. The officers have now since left, and I won't use the names, but I had a phone call saying, Steve, we're going to have to close the Key Theatre. I said, no, we're not. We're not going to close that, because at the time, the leader, Wayne Fitzgerald, and I were talking to Celador, who subsequently took it over with view of them taking over the Key Theatre. Those conversations were well advanced, but the officer got cold feet and said we must close it because we have to send out redundancy notice prior to a certain date. So I had to go on the telly box and explain to people why that was going to happen, all the time knowing that we'd got someone waiting in the wings who wanted to take it over. So that was a great regret, and I know a lot of people still blame me for that, but in the end it came good, didn't it? Because Celador took it over and doing a marvellous job with it, despite the fact that they're now lumbered with R8 rack in the roof and they've got to stand back for a few months. And the other thing was the hydrotherapy pool. I'm a big protagonist of hydrotherapy. I think it needs to be provided for people who have conditions that demand that kind of therapy. Whether it should be run by a council is another question, though. And I do know that there is a proposal from a local doctor to open a hydrotherapy pool in Peterborough. Unfortunately, it's taking much too long. Perhaps we could have kept it going for longer, but again, financial restraints were given the reason that we had to close it. And often, when you are a councillor and a cabinet member, you have to take the advice given to you by the council officers.
Now, obviously, we're 3 years on from that decision. Looking back now with the opportunity of hindsight, do you still believe that was the right decision to take? Would you take the same decision now?
Well, it depends on the financial circumstances. Should we have closed it? No. Should we have had another one ready, lined up with the doctor? But then commercial decisions and such like get in the way. That's another one that was delayed with COVID, I'd imagine. Should we still have Vivacity, the original format of Vivacity running, which we're running it for the City Council? All these things are imponderables, really. And you say, with hindsight, perhaps the officers may have made a different decision. But what I'm pleased to see is that the reasons that the officers gave to us for the closure of the hydrotherapy, but the school wanted to take it over, people thought that was fibs. Use that word advisedly. It wasn't fibs, but it took a long time to achieve. And now the planning permission's gone through and the school are going to take it over. So it will be a wonderful extension of their facility.
Was it ever difficult to balance the needs of the city in that role against the needs of your ward as a ward councillor?
Well, you know, there's always this sort of saying which has been used by another political organisation of put your ward first. So I campaigned under I Thorny Newborough first, and that will always be my major consideration. However, as a cabinet member, other things do come along. Thankfully, nothing in my ward has been tripped over by my role as a cabinet member at that time.
Looking back, were there ever any policies or projects that you regretted supporting whilst in the cabinet?
Not that I can think of. I'm sure you can pop one up and throw it at me and I'll answer it, but I can't think of anything that I was having to decide on that I regret.
On the flip side, is there any opportunities that you feel were missed while the Conservatives were in control of the council that might have put Peterborough in a stronger position than it is today?
Again, not that I can recall. Did we want a better market in Peterborough? I think that was one of the things that we didn't pull off. Again, just because the funds weren't there. Rivergate would have made a great sort of indoor market, still having people with retail units and market stalls there, knocking some units in together to make a larger indoor market. That would be fabulous with a food court and such like. Instead, we've got the stands on Bridge Street, which are okay, but you know, the market was closed, by the way, because it wasn't making money. Many of the storeholders were not paying rent, and the council was appalling at collecting rent. So that's not a cabinet member's job to go and, oh, you owe us some money. It's down to the officers to be more diligent in getting the money in. So I think that we lost the market, regret that, but it was actually not fit for purpose anymore. But we should have looked at somewhere like Rivergate or one of the other larger shop units, maybe where TK Maxx, and do an indoor market. And that would be ideal, because markets now are not just, you know, old Hoover parts and vegetables. They can be food courts and such like. And that would be visionary. Someone else should consider that.
As part of the group leadership, how do you handle internal disagreements when they arise?
I've never had problems with that. You know, in any kind of political discourse, you're never going to agree everything, because it's not human nature. What you do, you talk it through and come to a decision. And that's the way the Conservative group always operated. I've heard stories thrown around that there was a toxic atmosphere in the Conservative group. No, it's one or two people who probably didn't get their own way, then view that as toxicity. And bullying, come on, I've never seen any bullying. I've seen people disagree with each other and quite stridently, but I've never actually seen bullying per se, and I think it's a fib to say that. Equally as well, you have to, in a political group, all this independent stuff, in a political group, you have different opinions. You debate the options and come to a conclusion and then stick by the corporate decision that group has made. So I think that's fair in politics, but you have to have the debate first before you can come to an outcome.
I want to ask you about the financial situation of the council. From 2012 to 2025, the debt level of the council has risen from approximately £140 million to over £500 million. How much responsibility do you feel the Conservatives have to take for that position?
I think that whichever party was in control, bearing in mind the circumstances of the time, we have to remember that the fairer funding request that went out when I was first elected was cast aside by government, and government obviously got a lot of demands on the finances of the country, let alone local government organisations, local authorities, should I say. But important to remember, and for your listeners to understand, that such a huge amount of the council's budget is on adult social care and children's services. And one sort of recalcitrant child with problems can break your back budget-wise. So I think it's, to be a guesstimation, 70% or 75% of the income the council achieved from business rates and rates, the business rates we rely on the government to give back to us, incidentally, has to go on those important demands. And everything, what's left, the 20% or 25% left, has to do the roads and the schools. Well, we haven't got many schools now, but it has to do an enormous amount of what's left of the council's responsibilities.
A large portion of that debt was borrowed to fund regeneration and capital projects. But obviously the result of that is that council's now spending approximately £38 million a year on interest payments just to cover those costs, which is resulting at the moment in cuts year after year to those core services. Do you think that, in hindsight again, was potentially the wrong priority?
Well, the country borrows to achieve. Local government local authorities have to borrow to achieve outcomes. You do get your lower interest rates from the government loan board, or whatever it's called. I'm not being exact with that name, but something along those lines. And so therefore you're borrowing at a better rate than on the commercial potential. But you don't get anything by not investing in your future, and you have to borrow to invest.
There's a case to be made, and you kind of mentioned it there, that part of the financial problems the council have been in are down to the reduction in funding that it received from central government.
Yeah.
Now, that reduction did take place under a Conservative government. Do you feel that approach was the correct one at the time?
I suppose that we were talking about, and I think before I got elected, this got into train, the changes in the finances of government, local and national, are a burden one has to deal with. Did the Conservative government do the right thing with austerity? Amusing me now that the Labour Party are blaming the Conservatives for messing things up. And when you first had a Conservative government with Cameron, we were blaming the Labour for leaving them a lot of problems. That's what happens in politics. It's a great shame, but it's the nature of the beast. I think that the finances are determined by so many things out of your control. And so, no, I'm not going to berate the Conservative government. I think fairer funding is something that should be considered. I do think that funding for the major burdens of the council, adult social care and children's services, should be from government funding and a change in the financial arrangements to allow that to happen. And then councils should get on with the jobs they need to. That is the problem with having a unitary authority. You take on these problems, but it gives you a more power in the cabinet kind of operation. Local government reform will obviously be fundamental in whether local government finances can be better maintained.
Do you feel that decisions were made within the council quickly enough to adapt to those cuts from central government? Was the machine a bit slow to get the wheels going?
You're probably right, but a lot of this stuff was in process, as you acknowledged. I wasn't elected till 2016, and by then that fairer funding kind of approach was already in train. So yes, I'm sure there could be some changes, but not something I can give you a strict answer on.
Given the scale of borrowing currently, how much harder do you think it will be for future administrations of any colour or makeup to invest in Peterborough without passing those costs on to taxpayers?
I think that the constant cut of services and the resistance in putting up your council tax is a challenge for any party. No party wants to get elected by saying, I'm going to put your council tax up. But bills keep coming in, and they're coming in at larger velocity and for bigger numbers. The reset with the local government reorganisation needs to be carefully executed to make sure that the fairer funding that we were talking about is in place. Now, there's some silly suggestions that I've seen, late entrants to the race about which option to go for, but you've got to do it on sufficient scale to bring in enough revenue. Councils only pay for all the services from you and me paying our council tax, and businesses paying business rates to the government, which then is returned to us. So if you don't get it in, you can't spend it. And if you're not getting it in, you're not going to spend it, and then people complain about reduction in services. It's a simple conundrum, a simple execution of how you're going to solve it. I can't give you the quick answer on it, though.
Now, the current budget plans have council tax rising by a smidgen under 5% year on year for the foreseeable future. Yeah. And we've seen that over the last 3 or 4 years as well. Do you think there is a ceiling for how high council tax can go? Will there come a point where people will just say, I can't afford this anymore?
Peterborough's got a low tax, really, low council tax. And I think that for many years it's been held at a reasonable rate. For some period of time it was not put up. There is a case to say that during the period then when the council tax didn't rise, it should have done. I run a business, not so much now, but I ran a very successful business for many, many years, and the prices have to reflect what it costs you to run the business and to make a sensible return. And same with councils. If you don't charge people enough for the services you're providing, you can't provide the services.
Now, we've mentioned this already, but one project we do need to discuss in a bit more detail is the as yet unfinished Hilton Hotel. Obviously, it's timely we're talking today, as it was only yesterday that Cabinet took the decision to instruct administrators to look to sell the site. Why did the Conservative administration decide it was appropriate to loan £15 million of public money to a private developer for that project?
Well, I think we touched on that earlier in the interview, and I think it was a reasonable idea. Don't forget, we were talking about prior to COVID, prior to all the problems that the world has had for the last 5 or 6 years, getting the money from the government loan board, I forget the exact title of it, but you get it at a lower rate, to then forward that loan onwards with an incremental increase to make a return on it, I think is good business. But 2020 hindsight means that because of the world problems, it wasn't such a good decision, but we didn't know that then. Or the councillors John Holditch and David Seaton, who was the finance cabinet member, I think made a reasonable decision. So I'm not going to berate them, but I bet they wish they could change their mind on that decision.
Do you think any checks and safeguards that were put in place before the agreement of the loan was strong enough to be able to cope with potential bumps down the road?
Possibly not, but again, that was outside my remit. I won't say beyond my pay scale. I was a very young councillor, very new councillor when those decisions were made. So in principle, to have a hotel at that location involved in that development of the South Bank was a good idea.
To date, the Hilton development has cost the council just under £18 million. As we said, council yesterday decided to offload the site to try and recoup some of that money. If you were still in the cabinet now, would you be taking the same decision?
Possibly, but I know there is a feeling that maybe we should have gone with the finance officer's thoughts, calculations at the time we were in power, that we should get the financing to do the job ourselves and then discharge the finished hotel. Now that may have been a better idea, may still be a better idea, but we are where we are. The Labour administration had decided to sell the hotel to another developer, hopefully, rather than someone wants to turn it into something like flats or student accommodation. It wants to be a Hilton Hotel. It's great that we've got the Hilton on side with us still, but I think the important thing is, as we said earlier, when you sell something, make sure you get the right price for it, and you need to be a clever negotiator with a very sharp pencil.
What lessons have the Conservative group learned from this whole episode, and how can you reassure residents that a similar project won't be undertaken again in the future?
I can't give you any reassurances because we're not in power and we're a long way from power, and it'll be at 1 or 2 elections before we have the ability to take power. And I think that any decision has to be well considered with good advice, and that's all I can say.
Do you think this project has caused permanent damage to public trust in the local Conservative financial management?
I would hope not.
Now, the Conservatives have gone from 30 councillors to just 11 in the space of 2 years through a combination of defections and election defeats. How do you explain such a change in fortunes, and do you, as part of the leadership group, take any responsibility for that?
Responsibility is a funny word in this instance. Clearly, you have a responsibility to run the group best you can. Now then, how do you predict the fact that half your Conservative councillors decide to leave because they don't like some personalities involved in it? It's silly, stupid, not the way politics should be run. If you've got fundamental policy differences, I can understand people leaving a political party to go to another political party, or indeed to go as an independent. But that wasn't the case in this instance. It was a personality clash. One that I regret, because many of those people you're talking about, we'll use the name Peterborough first, were, if not personal friends, certainly close colleagues. And some of them I really regret no longer being with us. Not all of them, but some of them. And I think that this sort of trend towards independent councillors is a bad trend, because what you need is a group of people coming to a good decision and then powerful enough to put that through to fruition. And you'll never get that with a littering of independent people on a local authority.
Do you think there were any key decisions or leadership choices that contributed to those departures?
I can't say. I know that the leader of the Conservative group was voted through as the leader by all members of the Conservative group, as I was elected as deputy leader by all members of the Conservative group at the time, and with pretty good majorities. And so, some people get the ump because they don't get a gig. You can't. How can you change that? But what you've got to do if you don't win an election is understand that you weren't chosen at that time, but work together with the administration to make sure that you're well considered with any future elections.
How much of obviously we've discussed those that decided to leave the group. Obviously you also lost some councillors at the last elections. Is that a local issue, or was that more of a national issue, you think?
I think it was a national issue. I don't think we lost too many. I think a couple lost their seats. It wasn't a great clear out. There were 1 or 2 that should have got elected that didn't get elected. That's a different kettle of fish, though. No, I think that the national picture, volatility throughout the country. Peterborough is not the only authority that has turned from one path to another, and with lots of flotsam and jetsam along the way. So you've got independent councillors who've come from the left, independent councillors who've come from the right, independent councillors who fell out with one group and changed to another group. The volatility, I think, it doesn't suit me, because I'm very much an organised person. I like to know where I am, and I think that when there's volatility, it's quite, what's the word, not upsetting, it's quite annoying.
If you could go back 3 years before the defections, is there anything that you would advise the group, the leadership group, the entire group, to do differently that might have avoided this situation from happening?
No, I think what I would say is that ambition's fine, but blind ambition is corrosive. And I think that in any political group, national or local, clearly people want to rise through the ranks, or some people do, and some people are quite happy to be, just troops, as it were, rather than leadership. If you have leadership aspirations, argue your case and hope that your colleagues support you. And if they don't, then think about another day and trying again, rather than chucking things out the pram and marching off. Silly.
So looking to the future, with only 11 councillors now, how do you plan to rebuild influence and show residents that the Conservatives are still capable of leading the council effectively?
Well, we have local government reorganisation. We don't know what the council is going to be. Are we going to be Plan A, which is Peterborough Unitary together with Fenland, together with Huntingdonshire, or is it going to be Plan B, which also then includes South Cambridgeshire? Or is it East Cambridgeshire? East Cambridgeshire, sorry. Is it going to be that one, or is it going to be Plan B, Plan C, or the daft one that came up from the two MPs, whereby we have a bit of Huntingdonshire with Peterborough? Not big enough to be successful, I'm afraid. And I think subsequent, there's even been another idea put forward. But anyway, until we know the outcome of that, it's going to be very difficult to know whether the Conservatives have a hope of taking back power in any kind of way, and indeed to what authority that power would be attributed. So we will work hard. We are a good group at the moment. There's 11 of us, but we work very well together, and we will hope to find an additional councillor or two in the May elections, and we will work to make sure that we hold the administration to account. We've now formed a shadow cabinet, and we will be meeting with officers with the ability to learn of what's happening behind the scenes, as it were, and we will be attending cabinet to make sure that we can hold the cabinet to account with their decisions.
What are the priorities that the Conservative group are going to focus on in the run-up to the election?
We haven't had that meeting yet. Conservative principles, of course, pay your way, reward people who work hard, those kind of things. And I think that the Conservative approach will win through some further support as we go forward. I will add in here, I quite like Kemi Badenoch. I think she's a good leader. There are other potential good leaders, but what we need to do as a national party is not just keep apologising, acknowledge that there were some things that didn't go down too well or were missteps, but work for a better outcome for the party going forward.
How do you respond to opponents who say the party's no longer relevant in Peterborough?
Tosh.
Looking towards the local elections in 7 months' time, it's likely we're going to see Labour, Lib Dem, Green, Peterborough First and Reform candidates as well as Conservatives. What plan does the Conservative group have to stand out from that crowd and win seats?
Sticking to Conservative principles and the fact that we are a long-established party with a structure and infrastructure that will allow us to run effective campaigns and tell the people what their policies are.
Looking at those elections, are there any specific wards that you will be targeting, or are you taking a blanket approach?
Well, I'll say that we'll be running a blanket campaign, because I'm not going to give you all the secrets where we're going to be specifically involved. But, we always, as a policy, the Conservatives always contest every ward. And we'll do each of those wards that we contest with gusto.
I mean, I guess specific wards where you have councillors who were previously Conservative councillors, maybe ones where you would particularly like to win back, I guess.
Well, we'd obviously like to win back as many wards as we can. I don't mind winning a surprise ward that we didn't expect, but I'll be happy to get the ones we would like to get back.
Do you accept that some residents may feel still feel that they've been let down by the Conservatives previously?
Possibly. I mean, I'm going to stop apologising. I'm not even going to start apologising for what people's opinions are. I mean, I think that politics is a funny game whereby it sometimes suits people to vote in a direction because they're part of a momentum. We need to create a new momentum, not only core Conservatives that stick by us come rain, come shine, but people who think, yeah, they've got great ideas. And we've got to get that message across.
Now, the party that currently do have the momentum is Reform UK, gaining traction both nationally and locally. Do you see them as a serious threat in Peterborough in 2026?
Possibly, and I would imagine they will stand in some wards and we will argue our case against them.
Do you fear that they might split the right of centre vote and hurt your chances?
It is possible. I would hope not, but it's a possibility. The same as the Labour Party now are worried about whether the Greens will be sealing their votes, and it will happen because we've got a breakdown of the old tribalisms. Those tribalisms kept the two-party plus one on the side going since post-war, the post-war outcome, and I think that it's not happened before. If you go back to the 30s and the 20s, then parties fractured and they came together again. We're going through a bit of a sort of storm politically, nationally, and hopefully it will calm down and fairer weather will be before us. But who's to predict that?
I mean, as I say, they've obviously had a rise nationally. They've also had a rise locally. We saw they came second behind Paul Bristow in the combined authority elections. Do you feel that their rise locally reflects a genuine dissatisfaction with the traditional parties, or is it more of a nationwide trend that's pushing those?
I think people are a little bit disenchanted with politics. I don't think the Brexit vote helped. I don't think the fact that people feel less wealthy as a result of the financial pressures and a bit of discontent. There was also migration, obviously, that's one of the problems that really annoy people. But really, that shouldn't reflect on local government. And I would stand by the record of Peterborough Conservatives with what we did locally. I'm not going to apologise for any of the decisions or missteps, but they happen, and they weren't done with any intention to upset any particular section of the voting community.
Now, the Conservatives took the decision to reject the committee chair and vice chair positions that they were offered by the new administration, and have also removed themselves from the Financial Sustainability Working Group. What was the reasoning behind those decisions?
We thought we were mistreated, unfairly treated, because to stop any disruption, we supported the administration, albeit a Labour administration, when we had this coup d'etat threatened 3 months ago, an unnecessary coup d'etat, just a grab for power for the sake of power. So we supported the Labour Party at that stage. Unfortunately, with Councillor Jones messing up his leadership and standing down, we have a new leader of the Labour Party in Peterborough. And a different decision was made. And of course, Councillor Quayom has to now answer for people that supported her, Peterborough First, I guess some odd individuals who were independents, and the Liberals. So she owes them one. Now, in the process of rewarding them for their support, it meant that Conservatives who had cabinet positions, chair positions, were no longer considered viable. Wrong, bearing in mind the experience of those involved. And I think for them to say that we were offered chairs, we were offered half a chair, really. So there's a chair for one of the committees that sits very rarely. And then we're offered what wasn't a chair of a scrutiny or statutory committee. It's a board. And so we thought, we've been given crumbs off the table rather than being part of the meal. And so that's why we stood back. Now, regarding the Financial Sustainability Working Group, although we won't take part in that, we will be engaging with the council finance officer, and we'll be having our own conversations. So we will be aware of what the budget is likely to be, and we can input at that stage our thoughts on where that is going.
Do you fear that with the current coalition, the appearance is that most parties are working together to make things better, while the Conservatives are sat on the sideline throwing their toys out the pram?
No. There's no dummies, no toys, no prams. I think you forgot to mention that the Greens didn't take part in this current coup d'etat either, so it wasn't a universal. There are certain individuals involved in that coup d'etat that it didn't surprise me why they got involved.
Toby Wood, Vice Chairman of the Peterborough Civic Society, got in touch and said that back when the Conservatives were in power, you and he walked around the city centre talking about potential improvements, including to the Guildhall. He said he did the same with Councillor Farouk when he was as leader with Peterborough First, and is now having similar discussions with Councillor Qayyum. He says that many of the ideas and suggestions have been virtually identical, so asks why are implementing any of those decisions so difficult?
Walking around the city centre, he's not being specific. I like Toby. He's got a great passion for Peterborough and he's a Dog's Thought boy, so it makes him good in my mind. And Toby and I had a good conversation. I think several of the things we discussed, i.e. having tables and chairs in the centre of the Long Causeway and Bridge Street, have been implemented. Great idea. So we were both on the same page with that. Toby wants to put some glass around the Guildhall and turn it into something. I can tell you that 30 years ago, a gentleman called Vince Terranova, who had the cafe in the Central Park, originally put forward the idea of the Buttercross, it was called then, turned into a cafe. I think it's a splendid idea. I think it could be a tourist information bureau, it could be a little art gallery, it could be anything like that. It has to be done with style and a real respect for the age of that building. It happened in Oundle. They've done a similar thing there. It looks good. So a cafe come tourist centre, a fantastic idea. I don't know how you're going to put the toilets in there. That may be a problem, but I'm sure they could find a way of putting some kind of facilities in the building. So I'd be behind it.
Now, as we've mentioned previously, we're in the middle of decision making with regards to the local government reorganisation. Firstly, do you feel it's a positive move generally?
To get the finances right, yes, because Peterborough as a unitary is too small. As I've said to you, I've never been involved per se in the financial element of the Cabinet, but as Cabinet members, you obviously have a view. And I think that the government financing, or the local government financing, is under stress. And so to have larger areas with more potential income without the outgoings would make sense.
Do you think that Peterborough risks losing its independence if power shifts to a bigger regional body?
It can punch above its weight. You know, Peterborough is one of the major... Peterborough and Cambridge are the two centrifugal forces, axis, or whatever you want to call them, of the larger area of Cambridgeshire. So, no, I think as long as we make sure that we declare where we want to be with any outcome and argue our case with anyone who is in that larger group, I don't see any reason we should lose our position. Don't forget, we are crossroads. We're crossroads east-south. We're crossroads north-south with great rail links, great road links. Peterborough is a very, very dynamic town city with a great future.
Do you think residents will see any difference in their day-to-day lives if the reforms do go ahead?
I would hope not. I mean, I remember when Peterborough was the Soak of Peterborough, which was part of Northamptonshire. That's going back. And then it was Peterborough and Huntingdon. So local government organisation, let alone reorganisation, has changed over the decades. So if we get it right, it will be a great idea. And I think that I will declare now I like the option of A, which is Peterborough, Huntingdon and Fenland. It's big enough, but not remote from day-to-day activity. If you take East Cambridgeshire, Ely, it's a long way from Peterborough and people might not regard it as being pertinent to their daily lives.
One other plan that's currently in development is the next step of the local plan, trying to determine the locations for new housing and commercial developments. You represent a large rural ward made up of mainly villages. Is there room for more development in those locations, do you feel?
Has done more than its share of providing additional housing. The proposal that was passed in the last local plan for development off Ivory Road was a wrong decision at the time. It's now going ahead, and so therefore 265 houses off a road that's hardly fit for purpose turns into a single carriageway as we enter the Peterborough from and is a rat run, and there's a school sitting there. It was a bad decision. Now then, if we're talking about the one, never remember the name of it, at the end of Peterborough Road and the Parkway, and there's a lot of houses going in there by the side of the A16 bypass. That's fine, there's plenty of space there. It's next to a large road, it's not going to impact on any existing housing, and that's a good move. And so I would be supportive of that. Newborough has very little development because it's threatened by flood risk. So there's a little bit of development in Newborough, and Thorney, as we're talking specific to my ward, has some developments happening on the eastbound side of the village, and that's going through. And I don't think there's too many more claims for extra housing going in the local plan as it stands.
Should the council be building more homes itself rather than releasing land to developers?
We haven't got a housing revenue account. I have argued for it when I had housing under my wing, and we had a council officer who was of the opinion that we should have a small, manageable housing revenue account. In other words, build a number of houses but not turn it into a large operation, which we used to have, which got discharged to Cross Keys. So yes, I think that we should be part of the decision-making process, but I think that working closely with social housing providers such as Cross Keys is the way forward.
What more could be done to tackle homelessness and temporary accommodation pressures within the city?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Looking after homeless people is done splendidly by the organisation in the cathedral grounds. It's Light Project, that's it. Yes, they do a super job. And so they do rescue people who've fallen by the wayside and help them on the right pathway. So that's good. How do you stop people becoming homeless in the first instance? You offer them financial incentives. So, the council offer, if you've got rent problems, they will give you help with that. So these are the kind of on the scene, on the spot kind of ways to deal with it. Otherwise, other than that, more globally, we need to be more successful and offer better jobs, easier access to good jobs and such like.
Many residents feel that the city centre has become a soulless place which is slowly dying. Why has regeneration been so slow, and what should happen next?
Talking about regeneration of the city centre, it's difficult. It's quite a successful city centre. Do you know that? We held up very well against many other similar sized cities, towns. I don't see many empty shops around Cathedral Square or indeed on the tributaries. So we're doing pretty well. I think that it's all down to the economic situation, changes of people's habits. We all shop online now. Often I used to go into town to John Lewis's, and we missed John Lewis's like mad, but welcome Fraser's. So let's be positive with that. And I used to go into John Lewis's and ask for something. No, we haven't got it. If you want to order it, and then we'll get it in and come back tomorrow and collect it. So what do? I went home and ordered it, and it came to me the next day. We shop online because it's convenient, and we will not change that. The world has changed when it comes to shopping. My mum used to go shopping twice a week. She used to go to the market, come home laden with stuff on her bike. That doesn't happen anymore now. People go to the out-of-town supermarkets because they can drive there, park in the large car park and come home with a week's shopping. And then their clothes shopping has to be tied in with a day out. So you need to go into the city centre and have a coffee, have a meal, do some shopping, make it part of the social life. And that's where it's changed. And Peterborough, whatever people might say, we've lost John Lewis's and it's the end of the city centre. There's Primark in there. I'm not really into Primarmy, but I think that a lot of people are. The younger generation would just as soon have a Primark item as I would have something made by Hugo Boss. But anyway, talking about Hugo Boss, we have Fraser's coming back, and there are great stockets of Hugo Boss. Other brands are available, by the way.
Why do you think the perception is that it's a slowly dying place? I mean, you're saying that it's actually better off than a lot of places, but why is there that perception out there that it's not doing very well?
Don't know. I think people like moaning. Social media has enhanced people's ability to moan. Back in the day, you used to go in the pub, have a good moan, come home, and then get on with your life. Or you used to, go to your social club and have a good moan. No social clubs left now. Why have they closed? Give me that answer. People have changed their habits. We've lost pubs. Part of my life, when I was a kid, there were so many pubs in the city. My grandma used to live opposite to a pub. I used to go get her a bottle of Guinness and bring it back home. Now most houses, we've got a cellar full of Guinness or other wines and things. The world has changed, and we have to accept the fact the world has changed. And I think that a lot of people's moanings is to do with what they've lost from their lives that they used to enjoy. But that's progress.
Do you accept that some projects such as North Westgate have dragged on for decades without any?
Absolutely. It's a travesty that valuable piece of inner city land hasn't been developed. But then again, you never know. We might have put a hotel on it that failed. So the developer for that area has been a difficult man to deal with. And he was there before I got elected, so I don't want to be too dismissive of Peter Breach, whatever his name is. I don't want to be too dismissive of his intentions. But you know what? One of my colleagues Councillor Howard, I think it is, there you go, name check, John, thinks that we should put the football stadium there. You know, get off the mainline train, cross the road to our wonderful stadium, which will provide football and concert facilities. Why not look at that area for the new stadium rather than the embankment?
Peterborough has grown rapidly, but the transport infrastructure hasn't always kept up with that. We've got no light rail, and the long talked about transition to electric buses is still yet to materialise.
Yeah.
What should be done to improve roads, public transport and cycling routes within the city?
We have one of the best urban parkway systems in the country. So you can get out of it and get round it. Once you then come into the inner city, it's quite challenging to change Victorian streets into those wonderful conceptual Danish or Dutch cycleway kind of options. I don't think it's going to be easy. I'm on the cycling workshop, viewing ways to bring more cycling into the city centre, including getting over Crescent Bridge. But all the options I see, I find puzzling and challenging, because you're going to have to take away some of the ease to use your car to allow cycles. Now, I know we'd be healthier if we're cycling, but when it's raining like it is today, which form of transport are you going to jump into or onto? And then there's the Thorpe Wood one that was just recently. What on earth was that all about? It looks lovely, but it wasn't done quite correctly. And what's the purpose of having a cycleway from point A to point B, which is about 300 yards? So, sorry, Cycle Forum. I'm not sure we're getting it right.
Peterborough is a diverse and growing city, but some residents feel communities are divided. What can the council do to bring people together and build a stronger community?
Keep talking it up, keep trying. I've got friends from across the city, all kinds of origins, races and religions. I'm not a religious person myself, but I respect people with a religion. I don't think religion should be the reason for people not to work together and enjoy social activities together. But clearly some religions prohibit the use of alcohol, so they don't mix with people who do. There lies one of the divides in society. It's beyond my pay grade to give you an answer on that. I like people of all races and creeds and getting on with each other and enjoying each other's company.
Do you think the political division within the city has made community division worse?
I don't think so, no. Possibly from some people's perspective, but I haven't experienced that myself.
Now, as ever on the podcast, we like to finish with some quick fire questions. So firstly, which 3 people, living or dead, would you like to share a meal with?
From the political angle, I'd like to be dining with Ken Clarke, Roy Jenkins, 2 politicians from both sides of the fence that I really admired back in the day, and I'd like to have Giorgio Locatelli there, a fine Italian chef, to provide the food.
Now, what 3 courses would you have at that meal?
That's dead easy. Melanzane, calf's liver, and a cheese board.
Best piece of advice you ever received?
Be truthful.
What's your favourite book?
Animal Farm, George Orwell. I could have done 1985, but 84, should I say, but I think that Animal Farm gets it.
What's the biggest misconception people have about Peterborough?
That the city is mismanaged. I think that's incorrect.
What's been the best TV series or film that you've watched this year so far?
It was called Blunt. It was about Anthony Blunt and the spies, post-war spies that, the Gang of Four or whatever they were. Blunt was the remaining one that was established in the English establishment.
In 3 words, how would you describe Peterborough's future?
Opportunity, opportunity, and opportunity.
Finally, what gives you hope on a difficult day?
Friends, friendship, future. I'm not a depressive kind of person. I get up every day and look forward to having a good day ahead of me, and I do my best to achieve that.
Councillor Steve Allen, thank you for joining me on the Politics of Peterborough.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that's it for this episode. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks to Steve for joining me. You can follow him on Facebook at Councillor Steve Allen, Thorney and Newborough. Make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts so that you get each episode as soon as it's released. You can find me on X and Facebook at PoliticsPBORO. Please let me know what you thought of the episode. If you have any suggestions as to who you'd like to hear on the show or any questions you'd like me to put to our guests, you can email me at politics.peterborough@hotmail.com. This episode of The Politics of Peterborough was created, hosted, recorded and edited by me. I'll see you next time.